Hi everyone, this week of FANatics, we unpack our local government elections and discuss the voter turnout and what this could mean for South Africa's future. So stay tuned because we're going to have a good show. Hi, welcome to Freedom Advocacy. This is a production of the Freedom Advocacy Network, and I'm Sholan, and this week I'm joined by Marius, Ruud, and Nicholas Lorimer, our election experts. And so our locally government elections were held yesterday, and it's exciting times for South Africa because we might see a shift in power or we might not. And we'll be discussing the winners and losers of this election in this episode. So Marius, before our election started, we saw some predictions and polling that predicted the ANC would dip and possibly lose their majority below 50%. We saw the DA, scrapping along around 20%, 22%, and the EFF maybe not even going above 12% nationally, all their votes calculated together. And Marius, first up, before we attend to the big parties, I first want to hear from you. What can we expect, or what have we seen of the performances of the new boys on the block, like Action SA, the Good Party, and the range of independent candidates and movements across the country?
Well, Action SA has done pretty well. They're sitting at about 18% of the vote in Joburg at the moment. Of course, it's still quite early days, so this could change. But overall, this is a pretty good result for Action SA. They also got about 6 to 7% of the vote in Tshwane and Ekurhuleni. They only decided to run in 6 municipalities in the whole country. Four municipalities in Gauteng, I think, three in KZN and 3 in Gauteng. So they focused their efforts. But overall, I think they've done pretty well. They're probably going to be the kingmakers in Johannesburg, and it's not impossible that we'll see Herman Mashaba being mayor of Joburg again once all the dust has settled. When it comes to somebody like Good, I think they're going to be fairly disappointed with their results. They haven't done all that well. They're only sitting about 4% in the Cape Metro, 4% overall in the Western Cape. So I think for them, it's quite an underperformance. I don't think they're going to be too happy about it. But when it comes to some of these smaller parties, especially in the Western Cape, we've seen some of them do pretty well. For example, in the Cederberg on the West Coast, a party called Cederberg Eerste. They came second. They got about 27% of the vote. And that was actually quite a bad result for the DA. In 2016, the DA was the biggest party there with 55% of the vote. They dropped down now to 20%. They came third behind the ANC, who got 35%, and Cederberg Eerste, who got 27%. So, and then if we look at a couple of places in the Karoo, we see there's some parties doing well. There's a party in Kanaland, which is Carlersdorp and those kind of areas. We've seen parties like the Karoo Independent Party, I think it's called, or Kanaland Independent Party, do okay. We've seen Ikosa also do right in the Western Cape in some municipalities. There's also been the Patriotic Alliance, which did quite well in Beaufort West. They got about 20% of the vote in Beaufort West. So we're definitely seeing some of these smaller parties, and especially in the Western Cape, do well. And some of them could be kingmakers once we see coalitions and so on and forth. So when it comes to individual independence, it's still a bit hard to say. We have to wait for ward results to come in and so on. But we're definitely seeing some smaller parties do quite well. But then also there's some smaller parties that will be quite disappointed. Like I said, I think Good will be quite disappointed with their results.
Yeah. So that's exciting to know that there is some competition happening with the smaller parties, and will probably play an important role once coalitions are being formed. Nicholas, on to you. With regards to our top 3 political parties, the ANC, the DA, and the EFF. We'll see if Action SA1 eventually becomes one of our top 3 parties. But with regards to our top 3 parties, what do we see with the results? Have they been giving a good performance, or should they be worried?
So It's still a little bit difficult to tell for the EFF and the DA because not enough of the results are in. But I think we can say one thing for sure, which is that the ANC has not done great. They seem to have gone backwards over most of the country, and a lot of that I suspect is due to the fact that the turnout was so low for the election. Very few ANC people came out to vote, and I wouldn't be surprised if the final result puts them below 50% of all votes in the country. The EFF, it's also a little bit difficult to tell, but it doesn't seem like they've made any great breakthroughs. They certainly haven't grown like they did between the national and local government elections. They've sort of coasted along at a similar rate to last time, maybe a little bit of growth over what they got in 2016. The DA is a very difficult story to tell because it depends where you look. If you look in Johannesburg, the DA has taken a massive beating to Action SA, but still managed to maintain its majority in the vast majority of its wards. So far, I haven't heard of a single DA stronghold ward where the Action SA has managed to break through. In fact, it seems most of the places where there was a very divided electorate between the ANC and DA in the past, and that the DA was maybe slightly winning in Action SA, while it did hurt the ANC a bit, it seems to have hurt the DA more. So in Joburg, DA has not done great. In Tshwane, the DA seems to have done okay, although it's still too early to tell. Mm-hmm. In other places like Cape Town, DA seems pretty solid, as though it looks like very little has gone wrong for it there. I think it's the area around Howick in KZN. The DA has actually managed to win that municipality, it looks like, or at least is very close to winning it. Not enough of the results are in. Kocha, which was a DA municipality in the Eastern Cape, that's the area around kind of Jeffreys Bay. The DA has done pretty well there. So I think we're still going to have to wait and see. But so far, a mixed bag for the DA, some good results, some bad results. We'll see what comes up.
I think Midwell is also a good municipality to flag. In 2016, the DA got about 60% of the votes in Midwell. Now it's also, all the results aren't in, but it's about 70 to 80% of the results are in. And the DA is at nearly 70% of the votes in Midwell. So I think that's quite a good result for, it was always going to hold it to Midwell, but I think getting 70% of the vote there is a very good result. So I think the DA is definitely going to go backwards in the Western Cape, but I think this could be tempered a bit by results in the rest of the country.
Yeah, for sure. I do think those results are definitely encouraging. I know it's early to tell, but for you guys, I'd like to hear both of your opinions on this. Who do you think will be the biggest winner and who will be the biggest loser during this election cycle? What do you expect? Marius, you can go first.
I think the biggest loser is definitely going to be the ANC. They're probably going to get under 50% of the results of the votes. And I think this is a local government election, so getting 50% under getting less than 50% nationally doesn't mean anything for national government, but it's a big psychological blow against the ANC. First time ever in an election that the ANC participated in that they'll get then fewer than 50% of the voters will be voting for them. I think the big winners so far from looking at this, we're going to, especially the community parties in the Western Cape, we've seen them do pretty well. I think a lot of them will be kingmakers, and I think the other winner is definitely going to be Herman Mashaba in Gauteng, specifically Johannesburg. Looks like he's on course for between 15 and 20% of the vote, which is a pretty good result, I think, for what is quite a new party. And I think that probably sets up Herman Mashaba and Action SA they could play quite a big role in who governs Gauteng in 2024. I think as it stands, we'll definitely see the ANC go under 50% in Gauteng in 2024, and I definitely think there'll be a coalition government after that. And Action SA has got quite a good chance of being part of that coalition, I think. So, but without a doubt, I think, still it's a bit early to say, but I think the biggest loser in this election is definitely the ANC so far.
Okay. And Nicholas, your thoughts?
I think the EFF, you can also argue, has not done great this election. They haven't lost as big as the ANC for sure. But they, I think, like to spin this narrative that they were the inevitable next big opposition party, that they would destroy the DA, that they would become the big dogs, and that they would lead the ANC down the path of national democratic revolution, untethered by any restraint. And that just doesn't seem to be the case. The EFF is stalling a bit. And, I'm not terribly surprised. We've seen them encourage people to trash shops. We've seen them tell people to have 10 children, even if they can't support them. These are things that ordinary South Africans of all classes and all races look at and go, I'm not so sure, hey? So I don't think the EFF's message has been resonating. Now that Zuma is gone, I think they gained a lot of support on the back of being an anti-Zuma ANC of a sort. And now that Zuma's gone, I'm not sure whether they have anything clear to sell to the people, because at the end of the day, most South Africans are not as radical as the EFF.
Yeah. Thanks for that insight. I think I'm going to use this opportunity to just flag one of our articles, Marius, which was written by you, if I remember correctly, which is something that, see, the title says that this is something that what the Zambian elections can teach South Africa. And something you highlight in this article, you mentioned that the high voter turnout has the ability to essentially determine a election and oust the ruling party when voters actually turn out. But however, in the South African election, something we have unfortunately seen is that there has been a lower voter turnout. What is this voter turnout in comparison to what we've seen in the past, and what are some of the reasons you think has caused our low voter turnout this election?
Yeah, this election has had very low voter turnouts. In 2016, about 60% of registered voters came out to vote. This election, it's only going to be about tops 40% of registered voters will come vote. And that is quite concerning. That means people are checking out of the democratic process. In a democracy, the best way to make your voice heard and to effect change is at the ballot box. But if people feel that that their vote means nothing, then they turn to protests, which often turn violent and so on. And obviously, you can't condone a violent protest, but if people feel that their voice is not being heard at the ballot box, they turn to these kinds of things. So I think we just have to encourage people to vote. We have seen that change can happen at the ballot box. Even the ANC listens to or reacts to pressure at the ballot box. So that is something we've got to push. And we've seen what happened with those low voter turnouts. It's overall, there's been a high proportion of opposition supporters who've come out, the low proportion of ANC supporters. This is why we've seen this pretty disastrous election result for the ANC. And I think the ANC should be worried. If we have similar kinds of voter turnout in 2024, they're certainly going to lose their national majority, and then they'll be out of power. That's pretty much going to be the end of the ANC. We've seen it happens in a number of African countries where a hegemonic party that's been in power for very long, once it loses majority and has to go into opposition, it often falls apart and it kind of loses its reason for existing. You put up the Zambian elections there as that article. So UNIP was the Zambian governing party from 1964 to 1991. And when they lost power in 1991, they basically stopped existing. I think now they get about 1% of the votes in Zambian elections. Same thing with the National Party in this country. They were this party that, nobody thought for a while, people thought National Party would be in charge forever, a party would carry on forever. That changed. National Party won 20% of the vote in the first post-apartheid election. 10 years later, they won less than 2% of the votes, and now they also don't exist anymore. So once these big parties lose their national majority and come out of power, it's often they crumble very quickly. And I don't think it's far-fetched to say that within 10 years' time, the ANC might not even exist.
Yeah. So something I can definitely tell you I'm hoping for is that in my lifetime, I will still be able to see the ANC at 1%. That will be exciting times for me. Nick, another question just to add on to the comments Marius made. Something that I want to ask you is, when we watch the news, we see social media, a lot of criticism has been placed on the IEC for the low voter turnout. But my question to you is essentially, do you think that the IEC and political parties have done enough to actually encourage voters to, here we have something on offer for you, come out and vote for us? Have the political parties done enough, and have the IEC done enough to actually create a proper environment for people to cast their votes?
Yeah, I think honestly, the political parties, I think people do give them a hard time. There is something to vote for. And there's actually quite a lot of flavors. If I don't know, at least in Johannesburg, when I voted yesterday, there was the proportional representation ballot was enormous. There were so many parties on it. And I think that was true over a lot of the country. So there's definitely things to vote for out there. The IEC, though, I must say I was not impressed. There was this attempt to cancel the election, of course, which was defeated in court. The IEC, as far as I can tell from everything I've heard, ran the election yesterday pretty badly. There were lots of very long queues. There were places running out of ballots very easily. There were systems that went down. And this is following a trend in I think the IEC's deteriorating ability to hold elections. And I think this definitely has contributed to the low voter turnouts, is the IEC's general ineptitude. There's a lot of other things. There's no one reason for low voter turnout, but that's certainly not helping.
And yeah, and something that we see, it's hard to argue with you, Nick, that the fact is that there are a range of political parties for us to choose from, which means there is something that we can at least agree with or stick with a political party and vote for them. But something we're also seeing is that issues such as, property rights, race-based policies will continue to become important issues around which political party centers themselves around. So we will start seeing that there will be political parties like the DA, Action SA, Freedom Front Plus, the ACDP. These parties will, for example, become more pro, or will be more pro property rights, and will have negative views on race-based policies. On the other side, we might start seeing that the ANC and the EFF only go deeper into and have favorable views of race-based policies and more state control, things we know negatively impact our country. And do you think that this political realignment will somehow be an important thing for the 2024 elections? Marius, I'll come to you first on this. When we look forward to the 2024 elections, what is one of the most important political issues or important policy issues that you think will play an important role in our politics looking forward to 2024?
Yeah, I think definitely things like expropriation without compensation and things like unemployment are also, I think, going to be very big issues going forward to 2024. I think we're probably going to see two kinds of broad coalitions probably emerge. One that's broadly for the free market, and the other one that's for more status policies. Yeah. We'll have to see what people decide to vote for. We've seen that. I mean, I think Herman Mashaba, he's got some funny ideas on some things, but he's broadly a free market guy. And you see that he's got nearly 20% of the votes in Johannesburg. So there's definitely a kind of market for that. I think it just shows that there is a market for this sort of fairly conservative free market kind of party, and the DA could kind of be that, but I think a lot of people are turned off from the DA for certain reasons. So maybe Mashaba could fill that kind of role. But I think what we're definitely going to see in 2024 is some kind of coalition. And I think South African political parties need to grow up very quickly. And because that's coalition politics, you need mature politicians, mature political parties for coalitions to work. Like we see in Germany. Germany's basically been governed by a coalition constantly, or various coalitions since the end of World War II. And they obviously don't have the kind of chaos we've seen in places where we've had coalitions in South Africa, Nelson Mandela Bay, China, for example. So I think that's we better hope that our political parties grow up very quickly, because imagine the chaos that we saw in China and Nelson Mandela Bay, but at a national level after 2024.
And Joburg.
And Joburg, yeah. It's going to make things very interesting. But interesting in the Chinese sense of the term.
Nick, on your side, what is the important policy or political issue you think will have an effect on our 2024 election?
So I think the things Marius mentioned, but I think generally speaking, 2024 in a lot of ways is going to be a referendum on the ANC. The ANC has been this massive force in South African politics over the last couple of decades. It's really been at the center of our political life. An enormous portion of our academia, of our journalists, of our ordinary people, quite frankly, can't imagine a South Africa without the ANC in it. And so the question of whether the ANC should remain that central force in South Africa or not is going to be decided, I think, in the next election. And that is why next election will possibly be the most important one since 94. I mean, that's a very cliched statement. People like to say that all the time about elections, but I really do think that that's going to be true for 2024. It will be a sort of next decade defining election, at least.
Sure. That's quite important. But thank you guys for your analysis and your insights and your opinions. It was very thorough and I appreciate it. And now we've reached the end of this episode. So don't forget to catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and IGTV. And to join FAN, you can support our fight for freedom and sign up at freedomadvocacy.net. And remember, guys, that your freedom is worth fighting for.